Nice to meet you. Hey, everybody. I'm Chris Metzler, one of the programmers here at SF DocFest. As you might have heard from my spiel before, we're celebrating our 25th anniversary this year of bringing some of the most interesting, cool, and just great documentaries from around the world to here in the Bay Area. And then sometimes you're lucky enough, you're going through submissions and you don't just run across a great film, but one that has local connections. And you were lucky enough to see the great documentary Quba. And we're here with Bay Area filmmaker Kim Anno. Welcome, Kim.
Thank you so much, Chris, and happy anniversary.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, it's funny. As I was not associated with the festival in the first year, but I did have a badge and was watching movies in this abandoned church where they're doing. I was like, wait, you can do all this stuff with documentaries, and so it's interesting how it comes full circle, in that sort of way. Um, well, thanks again for sharing your film with us. Maybe a good place to start is like, what was the catalyst for you that you knew this was a story that you wanted to kind of dive headfirst into?
Well, it's an unusual sort of beginning. I was making another film in Southern Florida, and my crew was like, hey, we're in Key West. There's 90 miles to Cuba. We should really go there and talk to the scientists because we were making a climate story in Key West. And that was like the catalyst. Yes, let's go. So then we all flew to Miami and then went to Havana. And at the same time, there was the Jornada, which was the LGBT sort of international conference and gala and all kinds of activities. And I decided to go then because as a LGBT person myself, I thought, well, why not? I want to find out about it. And then when I got there, boom, tidal wave, and turn the cameras on, shoot two films at once. So what's what happened.
Nice. And so once you kind of like turned your attention there, um, did you kind of just kind of ride the wave or like at some point in time, like did you kind of have a framework for what you knew the story would become, or you just knew that there were these different strings that you wanted to follow and see where they went?
Well, I was really shocked because I didn't know the whole history of the LGBT movement in Cuba and how big it was and how it was inside government and outside government at the same time. And I just thought, what is this? How come I have seen these images? And that became like sort of the beginning. And then I realized, well, this conference happens in one province in addition to Havana. And so I went to the other place, which at the time was Matanzas. And by the way, that's the site of where they had the big fire and in the oil refinery, and they were really in a difficult situation during the pandemic. So I thought, well, this is sort of mind blowing. All these things that are happening here, and the kind of like rebellion, and at the same time, there was these government officials that were litigating cases of homophobia and transphobia throughout the island, and I'm like, how come we don't know about this? In the U.S. and around the world. And so then that became the beginning. And then I hired two Cuban teams, one in Santiago de Cuba and one in Havana, and began working with them and went back 7 times to the island, to different parts of the island to kind of get the story really at its root.
Nice. And can you describe a little bit, kind of familiar with some of your artwork over the years and things like how would you describe yourself as kind of a filmmaker and how does this kind of fit into the kind of your kind of repertoire and like approaches and things?
Well, I am a painter for almost 40 years. I've been a professional artist and painter. And in 2009, I saw an image of Mohammed Nasheed signing documents underwater for the Maldives. And I was like, this has got to this became like a catalyst. Like I decided to change my art. I was working very abstractly, and I thought I need to have content again. Obviously, there's a bell going off here. And then I wanted to have a different audience. My audience was getting older and older, and I wanted young audience. And so then I started making these puppet shows, these kind of water puppet shows, and I started doing experimental film through that. And then at some point, I was like, okay, I want to step it up. So this is my first feature film, and I'm making my second one right now in Indonesia. And I was just kind of like, hmm, I think I need to sort of add this to my practice. I'm still making paintings and I'm still doing some experimental videos, but I'm making a lot of big films now.
Very cool. And it's interesting you struck, my I of some of the kind of LGBTQ stories I've heard come out of Cuba over the years, or even the history there. Every single time I run across one, I'm always just kind of fascinated because in some ways it's this, to at least to me, as a white American, it's like so much this unknown history, and it just kind of just shows you about how the kind of diversity and variety that happens out there in the world. Um, with this film, maybe even more than some of the other films in our the festival, is like, what's the kind of postscript in the sense of like what's been happening since you finished the film, and how are people doing given, all the struggles that we hear that are going on in Cuba, particularly in the last year, just based on the nature of the world.
That is a really great question. 1 million people have left Cuba in the last 2 years, 1 million, because the blockade is squeezing them to death. And now they have no oil and they're like cooking with charcoal and storing things like in the ground. I mean, that's how intense it is there. And and many of the people that are in my film are in different parts of the world now. Um,
Wow.
some some have stayed and then others have emigrated. And I'm not saying there aren't problems, in Cuba with certain things or certainly human rights issues around censorship and other things. But we too in the US have like 1 million kinds of problems right now. So I really think we need to give credit where credit is due. And they're the only communist nation in the world to have marriage equality for LGBT people. And they now have sexual assignment surgery okayed for people. They need the raw materials for the surgery rooms, but the rise of more trans people has really come about in Cuba. One of the government officials is a trans person, and she was also imprisoned. That's Adela Hernandez, and she's in the film. And I would say it's a mix of people who really have been working a long time for their own liberation. And at the same time, there are committed revolutionaries. They really do say their economic conditions would be worse if they didn't have the revolution in Cuba
Mm.
in 1959. So I really, like I want to encourage people to oppose the blockade and to press on their legislators to really start to get the government to make a move on this. There's no military threat, there's no economic threat, there are no threats from the island. It's only beneficial to the countries to be able to come together in new ways. And at the time I started in 2016, there were 600,000 Americans going to the island, and now it's dwindled. It's very small. But Canadians go. Canadians send their college students there every year, and people come from all over the world: Japan, China, Europe, and visit Cuba because there's something the Cubans have that is in culture, both the music, the theater, the commedia de arte, all the different kinds of cultural manifestations they have, visual art, the Havana Biennale, for instance, is very strong. And that brings visitors. So they still manage to eke out culture, but in an extreme economic deprivation right now. And the tension between the Trump administration and the Cuban government is just overwhelming.
Yeah. Well, thanks again for, deciding to kind of turn your camera and capture the story. And, the thing I always kind of try to remind our audiences is that we're lucky enough that, filmmakers and artists like you kind of share their films early in their life with us. And so our role as an audience is to kind of, for the films that resonate with us, to kind of become the grassroots street team to kind of go out and talk about this great movie that we've seen. And I assume there's some folks out there that want to continue to follow your career or kind of where to point people at about the film. So what's a good way to kind of continue to follow the neat things that you're working on and also kind of help spread the word about the film?
We have a website, www.cubafilm.com, QUBA film.com. come and see our screening schedule. We have been screening around the world. Luckily, this story is of interest to many, many people. I'm kind of surprised and happy about that. Um, we also have a not NGO, wildprojects.org, www.wildprojects.org. Also, kimano.com, my artwork. And all three of those websites, you'll have updates on what's happening with this project and the very next one in Indonesia.
Well, very cool. Well, thanks again for making this film, Kim, and have a great day.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Take care.